Hey everyone, Jeff Kanof here, co-owner, vice president of Copperworks Distilling Company, coming to you live with a little Friday afternoon tasting. So today we are going to be talking about two of our latest products. Throw a little photo up of these. These are release 39 and release 40 of our cask finished gin experimental series. These are what we call our peated casks, and we'll talk a little bit about what that actually means. So if you do have these products, I'd recommend grabbing the bottles and a glass and kind of joining along. I'll tell you how they're made, but we'll also kind of talk through tasting them. And then I've got some ideas on how to use them in cocktails, which could be sort of fun at the end. So I'll get that photo off there. The first thing I want to mention, just let me know if you have any questions, comments, thoughts about these products. Let me know if you like them. Let me know if you've used them in cocktails anyway. Please share our Instagram with everybody. Share this video, our post about the products. I'm just trying to get the word out. Appreciate your help on that. So your first question you might have about these products is how did they come about? So there are two different peated casks that we use. So these are Scotch whiskey casks. One was from Caol Ila and the other is from Laphroaig. So the way we got our hands on these casks was through a partner we have in the UK called the Boutique Whiskey Company. So they're an independent bottler. They do really fun bottlings of whiskey, obviously as the name might imply. So when they empty the barrels that they've purchased, they have those barrels available. So they reached out to us, had some list of different barrels they had available, and said, "Hey, do you guys want to use these for any interesting projects?" So we said, "For sure, send us these couple over." And obviously, when you think of peated whiskey and you think about the barrels that come from that, your inclination would be, "Hey, let's use this to age a whiskey in." And that certainly can be fun, and there's plenty of those out there. But our minds went a different way. We said, "Hey, let's do a gin in these." And actually, we've done a similar one back in 2014. We actually worked with our friends down the street at Westland Distillery. They did their first peated product, which was kind of a precursor to their peated whiskey expression that they have now. And we used a barrel from that and made our first ever what we called our peat barrel gin back then. So that was under our own old label. So quite a bit different, sort of an American craft distillery's take on the peated whiskey barrel. So these are more iconic whiskey barrels from over in Scotland. So I won't assume that you know exactly what peating is and what the peat process is. So I'll do a little background on that. So when you're making whiskey, malt whiskey, you're going to be making malted barley. And during the malting process, part of the process is to kiln the barley after it's partially germinated. So back in the day in Scotland, the way they would kiln and dry it is by using their abundant fuel source, and that was something called peat, which is basically the dried layer of vegetative matter on the land there. So by burning that peat, they're heating the malt and drying it out, but it's also imparting this really interesting smoky flavor that has become sort of an iconic flavor in Scotch whiskey. So the island of Islay, where Caol Ila and Laphroaig are based, is kind of the icon when it comes to peated whiskey. There's 9 distilleries there. They all make peated whiskeys, so it's kind of become very famous for that. So we were very excited to get our hands on these peat barrels from those 2 iconic distilleries. The really cool thing about this is you might think, well, is that smoke just kind of overpower the gin? Are those 2 different barrels from those two distilleries going to end up kind of tasting the same? And we didn't know the answer. So we put them in. We decided to kind of see where it went. And what was remarkable is just how different the direction both of them went. So now I'm going to kind of get into tasting these 2. So I've got 2 glasses in front of me. Hopefully some of you guys have them as well. By the way, these were only single casks, so there's only about 250 bottles of each one of these expressions, so extremely limited. You hear big distilleries talking about limited releases. When you talk about small distilleries, that's when you're really seeing limited releases of 1 barrel, less than 1 barrel sometimes. So these are very limited. We have, I think, a couple dozen bottles of each left, so definitely get your hands on them if you're interested now. I'll be able to help you kind of understand what the difference is between the 2. So starting with release 39, which is the Caol Ila cask. So if anybody's familiar with Caol Ila single malt whiskey, which I have some on my shelf up here, So that's the 12-year expression. It's definitely a little bit lighter in the peat. So there's not quite as much of the peat that's smoked in the process. So it's a little more balanced. There's still plenty there and it's quite apparent, but it's not like Laphroaig where it's really kind of, a smoke show when you're smelling it, when you're tasting it. So the Caol Ila one for us really showed that. So we were surprised that we had to leave it in for quite some time to get the flavor we wanted. So it was in there for about 10 months. And what we noticed is it has a lot more kind of citrus and floral notes to it. And it does have that peat smoke, but it's more in the background than the Laphroaig expression. So this one, a lot of kind of lime leaf, some pineapple notes, kind of like desert spices, but not quite as much of the pure smokiness. I'm just going to give it another smell and a taste. I've, of course, tried it before, but it's always nice to revisit it once in a while. Anybody out there tried this yet? Any thoughts on it, or just thoughts on Caol Ila in general? Just put that in the comments there. So that one's really kind of nice and light, and I'll talk about cocktails in a second because it definitely presents some really cool options for the cocktails. So release 40, definitely a lot smokier right away. You get kind of this musty dustiness. It really tastes like a kind of old warehouse. It's got that really big smoke note, tobacco, some like cedar, maybe pine tar comes forward in the nose quite a bit, kind of a cigar smoke note, so much smokier. And surprisingly, this one only took about 7 months. So in a lot less time, it got a lot more of that smoky character. And again, if you're familiar with these whiskeys, that kind of makes sense. Laphroaig is much smokier of a whiskey, so that barrel is going to present itself with, much more of those smoke notes. We didn't know if that would happen in the gin, but it definitely did. So giving this one a smell and taste again. Yeah, it's just so much deeper level of smoke there. You definitely don't get as much of the, sweet citrus notes. It's definitely kind of more of a dark, spicy, smoky spirit. So that one's really cool. I would say, of the two, the Caol Ila may be a little more cocktail friendly, especially in kind of lighter, brighter, citrusy ones. Laphroaig is just a really nice sipper, but you can also make some very spirit forward cocktails with it really nicely. If you're a big peat fan, I would say, get them both, but the Laphroaig is going to be more up your alley. If you're someone who's a little hesitant about that peat flavor, then I would check out the Caol Ila first, and that'll kind of help you kind of get into that smoky flavor a little bit. But they're both really nice. These are two of my favorite things we've ever made. They're just really tasty and fun and so different. By the way, a question we get is, how much of the gin comes through? And it definitely still comes through. You heard me mention the citrus notes. Citrus, huge in Copperworks Gin. So you get a lot of that nice flavor coming through in the Caol Ila. And then, I mentioned pine tar is something you get there. You're still getting some of those, juniper kind of forward notes in the Laphroaig. So definitely a lot of gin presence still there. Had we left these in for a year or 2 years, you probably would have lost some of that. So that's why we didn't want to leave them in too long. Because for the experimental cask gin series, we still want them to taste like gin. Occasionally we'll get one that doesn't, and we're still pretty happy with it. But we really do want it to be kind of a balance between the gin notes and that barrel character. One of the reasons we do that experimental series is because gin goes so well with so many different flavors. So we want to kind of see how that plays out with the barrel finishing. So then getting to sort of the cocktail possibilities with these are where things get kind of fun. So I mentioned with the Caol Ila, a good way to go is think about some citrus forward cocktails that might work with gin or whiskey. So right now, actually our friends over in Vermont, Bar Hill Gin, they're celebrating Bee's Knees Week. So I thought with the Caol Ila, a Bee's Knees would be really, really nice because you already have a lot of that citrus note. It's really nice, with the honey you're going to get from that. So for those who don't know, Bee's Knees is going to be gin, it's going to be a honey syrup, and it's going to be lemon. So really simple, beautiful, nice, bright cocktail. If you haven't heard of Bee's Knees Week from Bar Hill, check them out. They do a lot of good work donating to, help save the bees for cocktails made and posted, for Bee's Knees. So maybe they'll give us credit for this, talking about it here. Another one that's great is Last Word variation. So one of the cool things about Last Word, so Last Word is essentially a gin, lime, maraschino cherry liqueur, and green chartreuse. You use those in equal parts, so it's a really easy cocktail recipe. I usually do about 3/4 of an ounce of each one, shake it up, serve it up. This works really well because one thing you'll notice in the last word is a peated whiskey can work surprisingly well, and then obviously a gin is how the drink was created. So having this peated gin is a really nice balance between those two notes. So super fun with that one. Another one that one of my colleagues, my former colleague Steve Harold, who used to be in our tasting room, he mentioned doing it in a penicillin. So a penicillin is sort of along the lines of a bee's knees. It's a ginger honey syrup, but it uses a peated whiskey along with the lemon and then a nice garnish of candied ginger. So again, this is a really fun one because you're kind of between the classic penicillin that uses a peated whiskey and the bee's knees that doesn't have that ginger element. But I think the ginger goes really, really nicely. You can get a recipe for that, just search it. I tend to like Imbibe magazine for my recipes. They're kind of a good go-to when you're searching online. So look for the penicillin cocktail. It's kind of a modern classic. It was created by Milk and Honey Bar in New York. And it's just a delicious, really simple drink, but brings forward some interesting notes that you wouldn't normally think about. So then switching over to Release 40, the Laphroaig. Like I said, I like this one a little more in spirit-forward cocktails. So things like old fashions. I was kind of inspired by another, non-traditional old fashioned, the Oaxacan old fashioned, which uses mezcal instead of whiskey. So using this gin, because you are getting some of those kind of earthy, dark notes that you might find in certain mezcal, is really nice with this. Maybe use a little bit of the agave syrup like you would use in an Oaxacan old fashioned. Get something really, really nice. But you can go a lot of directions with the old fashioned here. Change out your bitters, use any kind of sweetener. Using this as the base spirit, you're going to get a really cool result. Another thing that I just did the other night with it is making basically a classic martini. So I did 2-to-1 of this to a dry vermouth. And then I used olives. So normally with our gin, I tend to go with a lemon or orange twist on top because it's so citrusy. So sometimes it kind of competes with olives. Some people may disagree. They kind of think the olives work for any style of martini. But this gin in particular, again, because it has kind of that like smoky, briny kind of thing going on, really works nicely with olives. So I enjoyed just sipping on that. So real simple, recipe. 2 parts this gin, 1 part whatever your favorite dry vermouth. You could even use kind of like a blanc vermouth where it's a white vermouth but a little bit sweet because that works quite well with this. And then your favorite olive in there, 2, 3, 4 of them, whatever you think's best. Serve that nice and chilled. It's a great way to get the real flavor of this gin. The smoke comes through really nicely on that. So that's kind of all I've got for the tasting today. Hopefully that was kind of interesting learning about these 2 products, the Caol Ila Cask Finished Gin and the Laphroaig Cask Finished Gin. Like I mentioned, you can still buy these. There are a handful left, I think a couple dozen of each expression. You can go on our online store.copperworksdistilling.com. Right now we have free shipping if you spend $115 or more. So really it's just a couple of bottles and you get free shipping to a lot of locations. So check us out there. Be on the lookout for more of these. We'll be doing lots of tastings every time we have a new release. Jason will also be back starting next week with some more tour content. So we'll be going deep into some other topics. If you want to check out our Instagram TV, you can look at his kind of Tour 101, which was kind of a brief overview of what we do. But otherwise, we'll see you back here soon. Let us know if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.